Hello and welcome to another marvelous video. We are glad you could join us as we discuss the origin story of one of the most iconic Marvel superheroines of all time, Storm. Storm is one of the most well-known and popular X-women because she was one of the first black comic book characters and the first black female to have a prominent or supporting role in either of the two major comic book publishers, Marvel Comics and DC Comics. Her real name is Ororo Munroe, and she is one of the strongest mutants in the X-Men world with the capacity to control the weather. So fasten your seatbelts and get your umbrellas out, because you don't want to be caught in the storm for this. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Ororo's early life and how she became Storm. Contrary to common belief, the X-Men were not always one of Marvel's most popular and successful properties. They were, in reality, one of the least. The world wasn't ready for a group of youngsters who were genetically different from others around them for reasons that don't make sense now. After all, segregation and prejudice were still prevalent in society at the time they were established. Stan Lee previously stated that the X-Men were created to mirror what was happening in the real world. His writing and thoughts were intended to instill acceptance and tolerance. Lee went to writer Len Wein and illustrator Dave Cockrum with little to lose and a desire to breathe new life into the foundering business. The pair set out to create the first new X-Men comic book since issue 66. Their goal, however, did not include constructing a traditional comic book. No, their imagination prompted them to develop giant-size X-Men, a double-sized issue. This book serves as a bridge between issue 66 and 94, revising everything previously known about the X-Men. Marvel's giant-size X-Men was a big success, and it impacted the fate of the X-Men forever. Storm is perhaps the most essential character to emerge from giant-size X-Men. Let's briefly examine her history, which was also penned down in Uncanny X-Men issue 102 through a flashback segment during a fight with Juggernaut and Black Tom Cassidy. Ororo Munroe is the daughter of Kenyan Princess Nader and David Munroe, an American photojournalist. She was born and reared in Harlem, New York, until her family relocated to Cairo, Egypt when she was just 6 months old. Unfortunately, a jet crashed into her family's house shortly after she turned 5, killing her parents even though she lived. Storm acquired a severe dread of enclosed places due to the catastrophe and being buried under a mound of rubble with her deceased parents. Ultimately, Ahmed El-Jabbar saved her and took her up as an orphan. Ororo learned to be a great pickpocket under Jabbar, which led to her first meeting with Professor Xavier. Unfortunately, she was not the only young thief that Jabbar took in and educated. Ororo was the most naturally brilliant of the students. Her experience as a pickpocket benefited her well in life, as she had to break into locked doors and inaccessible buildings several times. She chose to travel south after spending several years on the streets of Cairo, searching for her mother's village. During her journey, she encountered and befriended a young T'Challa. Despite their growing affection for one another, their relationship was not meant to be at this moment. T'Challa, like Storm, was about to embark on his own rite of passage. That is, he had to prepare for many trials in order to become the Black Panther. One aspect of his training required him to leave Wakanda and go across the African countryside. Anyway, coming back to Storm, she eventually made it to the Kenyan countryside and subsequently to her mother's village. She was taken in by a woman called Inet in the hamlet. Even though Inet just recognized her as her daughter, the rest of the society saw her as a genuine goddess. This was partly due to her powers to manipulate the weather, which she had nearly mastered by this time. Ororo, unable to see one town succeed while many others struggle, utilized her authority to bring prosperity to communities across the land. So, when Professor Xavier was seeking new mutants to join his group, he knew exactly where to look, as it was not that difficult for someone like him to locate a lady who could manipulate the weather. When he arrived, he informed her that she was not a goddess, but rather a mutant. He told her about his missing students and begged for her assistance in finding them. Without giving this too much thought, she agreed, and the rest, as they say, is history. Marvelous story arcs of this beautiful Wind Rider. Joining X-Men. To save his first set of pupils from the threat posed by the sentient island entity known as Krakoa, Professor Xavier gathered Ororo and other mutants from around the world into his group of mutants, X-Men. Over here, Ororo was given the code name Storm by Professor for the first time. Storm was a member of the X-Men for many years. Storm, along with fellow new recruits Banshee, Thunderbird, Colossus, Nightcrawler, and Wolverine, remained members of the new X-Men when most of the old team left. This new set of X-Men were primarily adults who had been taught how to use their talents in the Danger Room. Storm's claustrophobia put the entire squad in peril when they faced Juggernaut and Black Tom Cassidy in Cassidy Keep. Ororo felt entombed between the massive rock walls of the ancient castle cellars and plunged into shock. She couldn't help but cry as her colleagues were slaughtered. She found the strength to fight only when everything had gone apart, and that too because of Juggernaut, who accidentally knocked a hole in the wall, and she could see the open sky again so that she could liberate the squad and reverse the tide. In classic X-Men issue 22, Storm met Marin in the Savage Land at a spatial interface point in a water body. Marin and one of her people were being assaulted by an underwater dinosaur when Storm came to their aid, eliminating the beast. Storm escorted Marin back to her home realm, where time moved faster than on Earth, assisting her in combat and ruling her people. When Storm finally departed Marin's reality, Marin handed her a cameo crystal, which allowed Storm to go to Marin's dimension using her lightning. Storm and Marin became great friends, and Marin dubbed Storm the daughter of my heart. Becoming the new leader of X-Men. As seen in issue 138 of X-Men, after many years of service with the team, Storm became the designated team leader after the previous leader Cyclops left following the supposed death of Jean Grey. Storm was initially concerned about her new responsibility, but with the help of her comrades, she quickly proved herself to be a good leader. Unfortunately, Storm's first time as a leader was dominated by reports about different supervillains having crushes on her, most notably Dr. Doom and Dracula. Yes, the blood-sucking vampire created by Bram Stoker, that Dracula. We will come to that shortly. When Cyclops ultimately rejoined the squad, Storm began to doubt her leadership qualities when an operation she led went not that great. On the other hand, Ororo quickly reaffirmed her authority, reminding Cyclops that now she was the team's commander. When Storm, the X-Men, and the Fantastic Four realized Archon was in jeopardy, they came to help him fight the Badoon. Storm and Archon confessed their feelings for one another, but concluded that their responsibilities came first. Later, as Sentinels attacked the X-Men, Emma Frost exchanged bodies with Ororo. Ororo was able to reclaim her body thanks to Emma's telepathy. Ororo assisted Cyclops and his father in defeating the Sidri, and then fought Admiral Samadar, Deathbird, and the Brood to restore Lilandra Neromani to the Shi'ar realm. After a duel with the Grandmaster and Death, Ororo and Wolverine invaded the Pentagon to destroy the information on the X-Men they knew Fred Duncan possessed. It was there that she first encountered and faced Rogue. Ororo was later assaulted and hospitalized, only to discover that Dracula desired her as his wife. Dracula didn't perform well in the romance area, but he managed to temporarily convert Storm into a vampire to make her his newest wife. Kitty Pryde ended the curse, but it spawned legends of another universe in which Storm went completely batshit, pun intended, on everyone, adopting the new moniker Bloodstorm. Following that, the X-Men were dispatched to the Savage Land when Angel requested aid. The X-Men were abducted by Sauron and Zaladane in the Savage Land and liberated by Angel and Kazar. Later, the X-Men traveled to Limbo to face Belasco, who was supported by a future version of Storm, who had been left in Limbo and schooled in magic, as seen in Uncanny X-Men issue 160. Later, the X-Men were seized and dragged into space by the insectoid extraterrestrial species known as the Brood in Retribution. Storm fought back, but her abilities blazed out of control. The X-Men found they had been injected with a Brood egg, which when hatched would change them into one of the aliens. Not wanting to bring such evil into the Earth, Storm attempted suicide by drawing all of the star energy surrounding her into her own body, killing the Brood embryo but leaving her drifting in space unprotected. Ororo would have died in the vacuum if it hadn't been for an Acanthi, a species of spacefaring whale-like animals enslaved by the Brood. The Acanthi, who rescued Storm, was revealed to be the custodian of his whole race's soul, who had lost his mom to the Brood and needed direction. Storm consented to let her consciousness guide the young Acanthi as it repaired her injured body, and once the Brood were vanquished, the X-Men were reunited with a rejuvenated Storm. After that, the X-Men returned home to confront the Brood Queen with Professor Xavier, saving his life by transplanting his consciousness into a cloned body. Professor X, Ororo, and Scott were captured by the Purifiers during a televised discussion with Reverend William Stryker. Ororo and Scott were tortured and connected to equipment run by Dr. Philip Ramsey that conveyed their anguish to Professor X while in prison. After being indoctrined, Professor X shot mental bolts at Ororo and Scott, trying to kill them. But Magneto and X-Men saved them and resuscitated them. After that, Professor X was transported to Madison Square Garden and linked to a contraption that would murder all live mutants using his brain power. Magneto's psi-shielded helmet distracted the professor long enough for the X-Men to smash the machine. Aside from those instances and an unfortunate predisposition towards storylines in which she lost her powers for some reason, Storm's tenure as X-Men leader had plenty of character growth that shaped her into one of the Marvel Universe's most accomplished and respected leaders. Enter the Morlocks. Soon later, the X-Men came across the Morlocks, an underground group of mutants who had captured one of its former members, Angel. The Morlocks, like the H.G. Wells creatures who had inspired them, resided below in New York City sewers. Storm and the other X-Men were disturbed by this and tried to resolve this and put an end to it, but confronting the Morlocks on their own ground proved to be more complicated than they anticipated, and the entire team was caught. Eventually, Storm had to confront Callisto, the leader of the Morlocks, on the villain's terms to save Angel and the rest of the X-Men. The outcome was a switchblade street brawl to the death. What Callisto didn't realize was that Ororo had spent years on the streets before becoming an X-Man, and she was far better at knife combat than the typical superhero. Storm used her cape to tie up Callisto's arm during the battle and then shanked her straight through the ribcage. Storm went away in stone-cold stillness after puncturing a lung and leaving Callisto to die on the dirty sewer floor. It earned Storm the Morlock's respect, but more significantly, it served as a reminder that Storm was not to be trifled with. When the X-Men subsequently flew to Japan to attend Wolverine's wedding, Storm first met Yukio, a ninja who was a friend of Wolverine's. Yukio was among the most freewheeling spirit that Ororo had ever encountered, and the two became good friends. Storm's outlook on life changed dramatically after Yukio pushed her to wear leather and shave her hair into a mohawk. Losing her powers and getting hold of the Stormcaster. Storm's powers were subsequently accidentally nullified by Henry Gyrick using a rifle manufactured by Forge, a mutant machinist who took it upon himself to bring Storm back to health. Storm and Forge fell in love during her convalescence at Forge's offices at Eagle Plaza in Texas, but their relationship was cut short when Storm discovered Forge had built the device that took away her powers. Later, extraterrestrial dire wraiths attacked Forge's headquarters because he was developing weaponry to use against them, leading Amanda Sefton, Magic, and Naze to join forces with Forge and the X-Men to fight them. Storm later left the X-Men and retreated to Africa, where she fully accepted the loss of her mutant power. Storm's penchant for having her talents taken away was obviously unpleasant, but to be fair, it's somewhat logical from a storyline standpoint. It's tough to build tension and peril when your protagonist possesses godlike abilities to control the weather, knife murder skills, and such strong willpower that she can temporarily cease being a vampire. The fortunate side is that Storm's temporary depowerment resulted in some of her most legendary moments. One was, of course, defeating a fully powered Cyclops to assume command of the X-Men. The other was when she momentarily took the role of Thunder Goddess, equipped with a magical Asgardian hammer. As one might guess, this was all part of Loki's strategy to disgrace Thor again. Loki constructed a magic hammer dubbed Stormcaster and handed it to Ororo after snatching a depowered Storm when she was hanging out with the New Mutants. Stormcaster, like Thor's Mjolnir, allowed Ororo to transform into an armored Asgardian form, restoring her power to manipulate the weather and all of Thor's other significant talents. While Storm was tempted to quit Earth and re-embrace godhood, perhaps reigning over Asgard alongside Loki, Storm understood that the villain who led the Avengers together was probably not on the level. Her own strength destroyed Stormcaster, but the hammer's journey was far from over. Stormcaster, like many other aspects of Marvel's interpretation of Norse mythology, seems to be linked by a cycle of death and rebirth. It reappeared several times, each time bestowing Storm with new and powerful abilities. Storm rejoined the X-Men and vanquished Fenris, only to be challenged to a battle for leadership of the team by Cyclops. Despite her powerlessness, Storm won and Cyclops left the squad. Ouch! Following this, the X-Men clashed with Mojo, who de-aged the team, including Storm, into youngsters. Ororo's powers were temporarily restored, and her hair was regrown to its previous look, but she lost her powers and returned to her mohawk after being freed from Mojo's brainwashing by the New Mutants. The unity between X-Men and the Hellfire Club. At one point in time, Storm and Wolverine examined the newly bombed house of Sarah Bailey, Jean's sister. After confronting Malice, Storm was kidnapped by Super Saber, Stonewall, and Crimson Commando. Storm resolved that the X-Men would be more aggressive and fight their foes before they were attacked after beating the Commando in combat. Storm proposed that she and Magneto both become members of the Hellfire Club's inner circle as the White King. The Hellfire Club and the X-Men joining up would give the X-Men access to all of the Hellfire Club's classified documents and would safeguard the school if the Marauders attacked again. Storm determined that the X-Men needed to fake their deaths and form an underground proactive attack team in order to protect their friends and families from their numerous foes. When Havoc arrived to check on the X-Men, Storm ordered Psylocke to erase the incident from his memory, but due to Professor Xavier's mental shield, he could not forget the incident, and after an initial struggle, Havoc requested Magneto to accept him as an X-Men and join the team. Getting her powers back. Storm soon recognized she needed her powers restored and sought Forge's assistance. Instead, Ororo ran across Forge's old tutor, Naze, who told her that Forge has been corrupted by his foe, the Adversary, and was plotting to destroy the world. Storm had no idea that the Adversary had corrupted the Naze lookalike following the battle with the Dire Wraiths. Storm eventually found Forge on a mountain during a vision quest with Adversary, presumably unlocking a dimensional gateway packed with demons. Storm stabbed Forge in the chest, only to learn that he had been attempting to seal, not open, the gateway. The Adversary then confined Storm and Forge in the other realm and took control of Dallas, distorting time and space to cause havoc on Earth. Storm and Forge spent a year on the other Earth, making peace and confessing their love for one another. Around this time, Ororo's hair grew long once more. Forge fashioned a new gadget out of components from a cybernetic limb that restored Storm's ability to wield her powers, which she subsequently used to create a gateway back to their home planet. After that, Ororo and Forge rejoined the X-Men and were captured by the Adversary in Roma's Starlight Citadel. Ororo was freed and together with the X-Men devoted her life to imprisoning the adversary using a forge spell. However, the omniversal guardian Roma brought the X-Men back to life and liberated the adversary, believing there could be no order without turmoil. The events had been televised live on television, and the world assumed the heroes were dead. After being revived, the X-Men chose to go underground and keep their rebirth a secret. During this time, Storm changed her clothes once more, swapping out her leather jacket for a black suit with a lightning symbol over her chest. Becoming a teen again, the X-Men were attacked in their hideout shortly after by the deranged scientist known as Nanny and her sidekick, the Orphan Maker. Storm pursued Nanny's vessel and was entangled in tentacles while Havoc launched a plasma burst and downed the craft. Storm was kidnapped by Nanny, who planned to exploit Storm's skills in her desire to orphan the world's superpowered children. Nanny utilized her technology to de-age Storm to her pre-teens and erase her memories to persuade the mutant to support her cause. Storm, however, fought back and overpowered Nanny's gadget. Storm, now a youngster with no recollection of her existence as an X-Man, resumed her life as a robber. During this time, Ororo became the target of the psychic creature known as the Shadow King, but she was saved by a fellow mutant and thief named Gambit. After Storm regained her memories, she accompanied Gambit to meet the X-Men. Storm finally returned to maturity when the X-Men were kidnapped by Genosha spies who exploited mutants as slaves. Storm changed, but the Chief Magistrate and the Genoshan Engineer belonged to a breakaway party. They were able to overpower their aggressors after restoring Storm's body and mind. Extreme Sanctions Executive. Distrusting Xavier's idealism concerning the prophetic journals written by the seer Destiny that predicted the future of mutants, Storm formed a dissident party of X-Men to hunt for the missing volumes. She severed links with the rest of the team for her mission and exposed her squad to the rules of humanity by leaving the Xavier Institute's protection. The squad was eventually reformed as formal marshals with worldwide authority. Following the demolition of mutant kind, Storm left to deal with an African problem, and the squad lost its mandate and discontinued operations. The marriage and separation of Storm and T'Challa. Ororo Munroe and T'Challa of Wakanda would find each other again, owing to their fame in the tiny world of superheroes years after they originally fell in love on their individual paths of self-discovery. But things were different this time. Despite having considerably more serious responsibilities as adults than they had as teenagers, the two protagonists were far more in charge of their lives, and they weren't ready to allow circumstances to tear them apart this time. Storm and Black Panther got married in what Marvel dubbed the wedding of the century, after a brief courtship that occurred against the backdrop of the Civil War event that made Captain America and Iron Man appear as shockingly bad wedding guests. With that and a brief trip to another plane of reality where she received Bast, the Panther God's formal endorsement, Storm was crowned Queen of Wakanda. This made her the most valuable mutant alive, according to Professor Xavier. Storm was the new face of mutant kind for the ordinary Marvel citizen, since she was a revered, world-renowned superstar, controlling a big nation like Wakanda alongside her husband. Unfortunately, some things are never meant to endure. Following the events of 2012's fittingly named Avengers vs. X-Men, Ororo and T'Challa find themselves on opposing sides of a struggle focused on the Phoenix. Storm was irritated when the Panther referred to the X-Men as Wakanda's state enemies. Due to irreconcilable difficulties, the marriage was cancelled, allowing Storm to rejoin her former team. But she wasn't done with Wakanda or the responsibility of leading a country. While T'Challa was dealing with a time-traveling future version of his nation that had conquered much of outer space, Storm went to Wakanda to rescue the people, among whom she was still popular enough to be worshipped as a goddess. This finally led to her reconciling with T'Challa, and while their marriage and love connection had ended, they left on good terms this time. A new era begins. Ultimately, Storm became a member of the mutants who aided Professor X in establishing a state on the mutant habitat of Krakoa Island. Storm placed Krakoan flowers on the grounds of the X-Mansion in Westchester 4 months before the mutant country was revealed to the public. The flowers sprouted, teleporting gateways and habitats. The X-Mansion was transformed into a Grey Malkin habitat as a result of this action. Storm was a support crew member who assisted the Krakoa heroes in invading the anti-mutant Orcus Forge. Storm was critical in a mutant circuit constructed by Beast's and Trinari's mastery over technology and the Stepford Cuckoo's telepathy to make psychic contact with Jean Grey in deep space. The heroes achieved their goal, but the attack murdered the whole crew. Storm announced the return of each member to the remainder of Krakoa, thanks to the Five's Krakoan resurrection protocols. Then she joined the Krakoan ultimate governance body, the Quiet Council, where she sat at the summer table with members of Xavier's idealistic X-Men. As Emma Frost restructured the Hellfire Club as the Hellfire Trading Company to conduct international deals, one of the company's purposes became swapping Krakoan products for mutant protection. Storm turned down Frost's offer to join its board of directors, but she became involved with the company anyhow. Even though Krakoa was open to all mutants, Kitty Pryde was one exception, since she was unable to enter Krakoa through its gateways. Storm kept an eye on her companion as she struggled with being separated from the mutant refuge, concerned for her safety. Storm traveled alongside Pyro, Iceman, and Pride to release mutants in a mission to confront Russian anti-mutant terrorists who used Forge's power-dampening technology. This prompted Captain Kate Pryde to accept Frost's offer and organize the Marauders, a gang of mutant pirates to operate on behalf of the Hellfire Trading Company, as Frost suggested to safeguard Pride. Dancing with Death. Storm continued to advocate for Krakoa and the Quiet Council alongside her duties as a pirate with the Marauders. She stormed an Orcus base with Cyclops, where they discovered not only a large number of mutants being held prisoner, but also a post-human child of the Vault named Seraphina. Seraphina chatted with Storm before escaping and disappearing. Storm used Seraphina's talents to bring attention to the situation and make it possible for a covert team to get into the Vault after tracking her to Ecuador. Despite her achievement, Storm was singled out by the Vault's defenses and tainted by their technology, finally collapsing into a coma. After being diagnosed with a machine virus and having Jean Grey and Emma Frost use psychic abilities to awaken her from her coma, Storm was given a month to live. Even with the chance of being revived because of a Krakoan mutant technology, Storm refused to accept death. Monet St. Croix examined her situation and hypothesized that a tool to rid Storm of the virus might exist in the world's evolving environment. Storm managed to get to a contraption that uncoupled her from the virus and led a group of mutants into the world with Phantom X and AIM agent Net. After being successfully treated, Storm was once again able to strike a balance between life and death and avoid meeting a tragic end. When Storm was invited to participate in a competition in the Otherworld hosted by Majestrix Saturnine, which pitted champions from Krakoa and its sister and rival mutant nation Araco against one another to end their war, it became clear that Storm had a solid connection to life and danced flirtatiously with death. Storm was responsible for using the Skybreaker, Wakanda's most revered weapon. She first tried to persuade Shuri and Queen Ramonda to wield the sword, but she was unsuccessful since they were only able to do so with T'Challa's approval. Because they didn't have enough time to deliberate, Storm made the tough decision to steal the Skybreaker for Krakoa. Her connection with Black Panther and Wakanda was strained due to the heist. Storm joined the Krakoa Sword Bearers and marched to fight in the Otherworld while brandishing Skybreaker. Before the competition, Krakoans and the Iraqi had a feast where the Horseman of Death was intrigued by Storm's bravery and skill at defying death so many times. They waltzed while talking about their competition. The first test for Storm took the form of a crooked market drinking game between Wolverine and Blightsville. The Horsemen of Death, who had delivered them the drink from Dryador to neutralize Storm's ability in time for their battle, had set this up. Storm was powerless, yet in the first blood fight at the vampire court of Sevalith, she savagely defeated the Horsemen of Death. Storm gave the Skybreaker back to Wakanda when Krakoa was pronounced the winner, but the wounds from her treachery were still visible. At last, Storm bid her fellow Marauders farewell and graciously expressed her gratitude for helping them with their goal for mutant kind. Being the voice of Saul, during the Hellfire Gala, mutant kind decided to invade Mars to assimilate the vanquished Arakko population into the cosmos. Many Krakoan and Araki Omega-level mutants, including Storm, who constructed the diplomatic ring on Lake Hellas and produced the atmosphere, terraformed the Crimson Planet. When Nameless, an Omega-level shapeshifter, challenged Storm for the seat of All Around Us at the Great Ring of Arakko, Storm won a seat in the Araki society. In the Circle Perilous, Nameless assumed the appearance of Storm in her heyday while they battled. Nameless was frozen by Storm to stop her from moving and changing forms, but instead of giving in, Nameless decided to perish. Storm assumed the role of Regent of Arakko as a result, managing the affairs of the populace and the land. Abigail Brand, the director of SWORD, significantly impacted Planet Arakko's transformation as the solar system's diplomatic hub. Storm took on the position of Voice of Saul in the Galactic Council as the Regent of Arakko, serving as a negotiator for extraterrestrial civilizations. The mines of the anti-magic mineral known as Mysterium served as one of mutant kind's primary resources throughout this period of social change. Dr. Doom warned Storm that Brand might pose a danger to their interests over a meal on Arakko when they discussed the function of Mysterium. Later, as a member of the Great Ring of Arakko, Storm was continually up against opponents in the Circle Perilous in an effort to establish her value. However, she prevailed in every battle, increasing her stature further in the Araki community. Storm declined Brand's invitation to lead a group of X-Men affiliated with SWORD to intervene on Arakko because she was suspicious of and uneasy with her interventions on Arakko. Instead, Storm resigned from her role as Monarch and got in touch with Magneto and Sunspot to organize a group of heroes to battle for Arakko.
I command the Sahara winds, transform this ice to steam!
Storm in X-Men the Animated Series. Storm was one of the primary protagonists of the 1992 X-Men the Animated Series. Her origin story was somewhat similar to that of the comics, with a few artistic liberties here and there. African native Aurora Monroe was born in a tiny community close to Mount Kilimanjaro. She possessed special abilities at a young age and helped her community with those powers. Aurora nearly died when she was buried as a youngster. She had claustrophobia as a result, which affected her for the rest of her life. Aurora then encountered Professor Charles Xavier and became a member of his X-Men with Rogue, Morph, Cyclops, Beast, Gambit, and Jean Grey. She took the moniker of Storm and was the third in charge, only behind Xavier and Cyclops. The two-part episode in Season 5, which mainly centered around Storm, was titled Stormfront. The story goes like this. Severe storms rage in Washington, D.C., caused by unusual yellow and purple clouds. The media blames mutants, and the X-Men arrive to try to address the problem. Storm attempts and fails to utilize her abilities to halt the storm. Archon saves her when she is hit and collapses to the ground. Archon admits to causing the storm and remotely stops it. Storm and Archon then go to Archon's homeworld, with Storm leaving a hint for the X-Men to find her. It is revealed that Archon's planet, Pol Macus, is threatened by storms that threaten to breach the shields that protect cosmic radiation from space from killing the inhabitants. Storm agrees to use her skills to attempt to halt the showers before they wreak too much harm. Back on Earth, the X-Men discover Storm's hint and open a gateway to Polmachus. However, they are ambushed by an angry mob and robots once they arrive. Soon, it is discovered that an energy transmitter is generating the weather interface, but Archon claims that they cannot turn it off. Storm ultimately works her way around the transmitter and stops the storm, rescuing Polmachus. The X-Men arrive at Archon's palace and confront him, while Storm is unconscious as a result of her efforts, not understanding why he had grabbed Storm. When Storm wakes up, she informs the squad of what had happened. After the fighting stopped and the festivities began, Storm and Archon agreed to marry each other. The second episode begins in Polmachus, where the X-Men contemplate Storm's marriage to Archon despite only knowing him briefly. Storm informs them that this is what she wants, because as an X-Man, she has never been able to make her own critical decisions since she was a teenager. Elsewhere, Archon discusses with one of his advisors how he might have just shut off the energy transmitter instead of traveling to Earth for assistance. Archon then reveals that he intends to invade a neighboring planet, Belgania, for slave labor. Next, we see Storm and Jubilee planning the wedding when the latter runs into one of the slaves. Jubilee is perplexed by the circumstance, but shrugs it off. Wolverine speaks with another worker before Archon arrives and terrifies the enslaved person to death. The X-Men determine that something is awry with Polmachus and set out to discover what it is. Storm sees the invading fleet towards Belgania, but Archon convinces her that they are simply there to provide wedding gifts. Wolverine, Beast, and Cyclops track down the rebel commander and combat Archon's robots when they attack. The mutants then liberate Belgania's freshly kidnapped captives. While Storm tries to persuade Jubilee that Archon is a nice guy, the commander of Polmachus orders the X-Men to be executed on sight. Soon, the couple organizes a dinner party, but the X-Men and rebels arrive, exposing to Storm how her fiancé maintains his dominion by employing enslaved people. Storm quickly turns against Archon, and a confrontation between Archon, his robots, and the X-Men erupts. Archon eventually allows the crew to return to Earth, but not before Storm cuts the power to the slaves' control rings, liberating them from Archon's grasp. Storm in X-Men movies. Halle Berry played Storm in 4 X-Men films. The first 3, which were titled X-Men, X2, and X-Men The Last Stand respectively, and also in X-Men Days of Future Past. Alexandra Shipp played a younger version of the character in the 2016 film X-Men Apocalypse and the 2019 feature Dark Phoenix. She is a member of the X-Men squad when Wolverine encounters them and saves him from Sabretooth in the first film. She battles alongside the other X-Men to save Rogue and stop Magneto, then defeats Toad on her own. In the sequel X2, the X-Men join forces with Magneto to rescue their race. She and Jean Grey track down Nightcrawler and convince him to join the X-Men. She and Nightcrawler eventually successfully prevent a brainwashed Xavier from killing humanity and release him from William Stryker's Cerebro. In The Last Stand, in which she is given a more significant role, she takes over as the new leader of the X-Men following the reported death of Charles Xavier and eventually defeats Magneto. It's also indicated that Storm has an unrequited crush on Wolverine and is one of the few individuals who know about his feelings for Jean. This is seen in a deleted scene from Days of Future Past in which Storm and Wolverine kiss. She appears in a snapshot with Wolverine in Yashida's scrapbook in The Wolverine. Days of Future Past, set many years later, sends Wolverine's thoughts back in time to change history and prevent the war between humans and mutants from starting. Storm and other mutants attempt to halt the Sentinels until Wolverine completes his task. Storm is unfortunately murdered by a Sentinel, impaling her from behind as it climbs the wall, flinging her body down the slope. However, Wolverine's objective is a success, and these events are wiped, and Wolverine awakens into a different reality in which Storm is still alive. Sometimes these comic book stories can really get on your nerves. Why is Storm considered an Omega-level mutant? Storm is one of the most powerful mutants on the planet, with a myriad of talents, most of which are aspects of her ability to manipulate the weather. Storm has the psionic power to manipulate all types of weather across a large region. She has authority over both terrestrial and interplanetary environments. She has proven exceptional control over air pressure and can change the atmosphere's temperature, regulate all types of precipitation, humidity, and moisture, and produce lightning and other electromagnetic atmospheric phenomena. She has the ability to summon all kinds of meteorological events, including blizzards, hurricanes, tornadoes, thunderstorms, and mist. She may also dispel such weather, resulting in a clear sky. Her exact control over the atmosphere enables her to produce unique weather phenomena. She can generate precipitation at higher or lower altitudes than usual, cause whirlwinds to travel in any path, channel atmospheric electromagnetism through her guts to generate electric blasts, flash freeze objects, congeal air pollutants into acid rain or toxic fog, and summon air currents strong enough to support her mass to elevate herself or others to fly at high elevations and speeds. Her power is so strong that she can influence the air in someone's lungs. She can also regulate the pressure within the human inner ear, which she utilizes to inflict severe agony. She is a competent, crafty, and brilliant hand-to-hand combatant who was trained by her former husband Black Panther, Ahmed El-Jabbar, Professor X, and also Wolverine. Storm has defeated physically stronger enemies like Callisto and the Crimson Commando in hand-to-hand battles by employing superior tactics. Storm is a great marksman with firearms and a skilled knife user. Storm also speaks Swahili, Russian, and Arabic fluently. Storm's potential is yet to be realized, and the supergiant once said that she was an Omega-level mutate, pairing her with Omega-level mutants like Iceman and Rachel Grey. Marvelous verdict. If you have made it till here, then you will agree when I say that Storm is not only one of the most powerful mutants, but also one of the most powerful comic book characters of all time. She has defeated villains much stronger than her, and she has even defeated Wonder Woman once in the crossover event DC vs Marvel Comics. She is not only powerful, but also very influential and empowering, not only for women, but for everyone around the world. Who is your favorite X-Men member? Let us know in the comments below. I'll see you in the next one. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.
Do you know what happens to a toad when it's struck by lightning?